we have so much to talk about today,
Yes.
but before we dive in, I would love to hear a little bit about your journey. So what initially sparked your interest in changing people's lives?
Well, I think that journey starts with, my whole journey with NLP, which goes back to 1975 at University of California at Santa Cruz, when I walked into a linguistics class that was being given by John Grinder, who was a linguistics professor at University of California at Santa Cruz. And so he and Bandler had just finished writing and publishing their first book, which was The Structure of Magic, Volume 1. And John taught us, I think it was, I don't know, it was one of the earliest days of the class, the first or second day of class, taught us basically, the foundations of the NLP meta model. And it was one of the first really practical things I'd ever learned in school. So it was very, Ian Bandler were also very excited about what they could do. And of course, I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1960s and 1950s, 60s, 70s. And in those days, that was very much, how would I say, there was a whole sense of wanting to, that you could do whatever you wanted and you could make a better world. It's the same time that Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were starting Apple, in the same, almost just a few miles away. So there was really this sense that, you could make a difference in the world. And so taking this class with John Grinder, I realized right away, because they had been modeling these, effective therapists. And I realized that I could, just with that background, with this meta model, I could really make a difference in people's lives. And I didn't have to have whatever 20 years of training as a psychiatrist or something. You just needed to know, this technology, And then I think for me, it was very clear and very exciting what they were saying about that the key of any kind of change was being able to enrich somebody's inner map or inner model of the world. So as a 19-year-old, I was completely fascinated and began to utilize putting into practice what they taught us, and I could see it was making a difference. So that was sort of what got me started. And then Bandler and Grinder were doing these weekly groups up at this property that they were on. And so I started going to those groups and became part of they're called the meta groups, and became part of that. And yeah, so I mean that was the start. That was the start.
That's nice. So your first book, Sleight of Mouth, was published in 1999. How
Yes.
come it took you 25 years for the second book to come out? Is there a particular reason or a special meaning that you published the second one
Well,
25 years later? Yeah.
I'd always intended to publish a second one, but I had a lot of other books I was writing as well. There was a lot of other things going on, and I wanted to, for me, the whole idea of the second book was to make it very practical. I've been collecting material for that second book for years. For every one of the patterns, I wanted to make sure that I had a joke, whether I had an Erickson example, I had, all these different, ways to illustrate the pattern. But I think what really, kind of stimulated me to write it now in this particular time is because I think we are sort of more and more in entering into a sleight of mouth world, meaning that, if you take what's happening with social media, especially with what's happening with so-called algorithmic bubbles, where basically, these, what they call echo chambers, where people are basically just getting words and words and words and words and building beliefs based on just other words. And I thought this is so important to be able to have a technology. I mean, again, it's interesting. I was saying that what got me started with NLP was this meta model, which was, you listen to these certain patterns, you ask certain questions, and you can change people's lives. You just need to know the formula. Well, similar thing with sleight of mouth, right? It's except that it's giving you a bit more insight into, again, the mechanics of how people build beliefs. Anyway, I think why now is that our world, it really needs it. And we can see that there's more and more divisiveness taking place. We can see that there is more and more people getting caught up in, conspiracy theories, in, things that are essentially what we would call sleight of mouth. It's all worlds created by words rather than actual experiences. And so my goal in writing it now was to be able to try to provide people with a kind of you might say, um, a virus protection software like you would get for your computer, so that there's all these possible thought viruses, these limiting beliefs that are going around. And how do you know which ones to choose? How do you know which ones to take on? And a lot of times we already have taken some on unconsciously, and it's helpful to have a way to be able to, first of all, recognize that, and then secondly, be able to do something about it, to be able to, transform that. So, yeah, I think that's the main reason. It's something I've been planning to do for a long time, but had a lot of other things going on as well. But this seemed to me to be the time.
So for someone who hasn't heard of NLP or hasn't heard of sleight of mouth, how would you explain the title of the book? What is sleight of mouth?
Yeah, yeah, I think that's a great question. So sleight of mouth is it's a play on words. There's an English word, sleight of hand, which is a type of magic that you do with what somebody, a card magician, will take one card and suddenly it turns into another, or you pull a rabbit out of a hat, or you saw somebody in half, and it's a kind of a type of magic that is based on illusion. So you want to try to create an illusion, but you're doing it through a certain kind of dexterity. So the term sleight in sleight of mouth actually means to be dexterous, to be cunning. Um, and so what it's basically saying is that you're doing this kind of magic with words, as opposed to by manually manipulating something. You're taking something that appears one way, and suddenly it's like by magic it appears another way. And so the originally that Richard Bandler was doing what he called sleight of mind. And sleight of mind was that similar kind of idea that your mind can play tricks, and you can then learn how to use those tricks or to shift those perspectives. And for me, I'd always been interested in, modeling how people, historical people, were able to, make big changes in the world. It was, you know, but from a neuro-linguistic perspective, understanding what people like Socrates were able to do, or Jesus, or others who clearly, changed people's lives and change the world through the power of the word. And for me, there was something more than just the meta model going on. There was these other kinds of ways of using words. And of course, we often call them verbal reframes. You know, you're reframing through language somebody's perspective. So so again, the idea of the title is, you know, it's alluding to this idea of the power of the word and the magic of language, and how language can completely change our perspective of some, you know, of what's going on in the external reality. It can take something that seems bad and make it seem good. It can take something that seems good and suddenly make it seem bad just by the way that you talk about it. Um, and it seemed to me to be important to be able to, you know, identify what were some of the ways that, you know, we do that and that it has been done through history.
I think you already answered my next question, but let's maybe a little bit repeat the
Yeah,
actual beginning, or where did sleight of mouth come from? How did you discover these patterns? Did you read different books, listen to different
yeah,
people?
yeah. Well, you know, the very first thing that I ever did, one of the first things I did, so when I got involved in NLP, you know, I was at the University of California at Santa Cruz, and I actually started as an art major there. And then my second year, I switched to being a physics major. And then my third year, I switched to being a politics major. And studying politics, I thought I should learn something about language. And that's why I walked into John Grinder's you know, beginning linguistics class. And so I was taking that class, but I was also, you know, studying politics. And one of the books we were working with was Plato's Republic, where, you know, you have these Socratic dialogues. And so one of the first things that I did that caught John Grinder's attention was I modeled how Socrates in these dialogues was using certain meta model patterns. And John Grinder thought that was, you know, fascinating, because he also had an interest in politics himself. He was actually a very politically active person. He was kind of a radical professor. You know, this was back in the 1970s when there was a lot of, you know, in the United States, anti-war movements going on. Anyway, he gave me the assignment to uh, look at Gregory Bateson's metalogs. So Gregory Bateson did these dialogues with his daughter, Mary Catherine, and he called them metalogs as opposed to dialogues, because they were kind of talking about things. Anyway, this got me very interested in, you know, how people use language, especially conversationally, to, you know, bring new perspectives, to shift points of view. And I had always been, you know, interested in how people, as I said before, you know, how people throughout history were able to make a difference, you know, just basically just using language. All that's there is language. But even the person is not around anymore. They might be gone for 1,000 years, but these words are living on. You know, what is it about those words that make them last? What is it about those words that still change people's minds today? You know, it could be something somebody wrote 100 years ago, 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, and yet it still carries some kind of magic, if you will. So yeah, so I wanted to try to find out, you know, well, what is it that they're doing? I have to also say, you know, probably another kind of at least parallel influence in some way was that my father was a lawyer. Um, and so we had an interest in language and how you use language to, you know, present an argument, or to, you know, so you have two different views, and who wins the, you know, the case is going to depend a lot on how you present something and the way that you do it. So yeah, so it was basically trying to understand what, what is as Gregory Bateson would say, what's the difference that makes the difference in these particular, with these people and the things that they said. And yeah, so that was the intention. Yeah.
In the first book, you also speak about your mother. So she was
Yes.
initially she was given only 6 months to live after her breast cancer diagnosis.
Yeah.
However, she surpassed this prognosis significantly, living for 70 years after this diagnosis. And this
Yeah.
remarkable extension of her life is often cited as a testament to the impact of positive mindset, psychological support,
Sure.
and also the application of techniques like sleight of mouth patterns.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think the key here is that it has a lot to do. So first of all, let's go back and just, clarify that sleight of mouth patterns are essentially about language at the level of beliefs and belief systems. So we use language for a lot of different things. We can use language I can give you my telephone number or something, but that's not going to change your belief, right? That's not about beliefs. So one of the first key things is that sleight of mouth is about being able to use language as a way to either create or to, re-examine certain beliefs. So in this case with my mother, when she was given this diagnosis, this is, any diagnosis is based on a certain beliefs and belief systems. I mean, science itself is a kind of a belief system. It says, this is how you know what's true. There's this means this means this. It's all about cause and effect. And so the key in this case with my mother was that the doctors were saying that there wasn't anything they could do for her medically. And of course, this prognosis of months, wasn't even necessarily as many as 6 months, that this was a recurrence. She'd had breast cancer once before. And in less than 2 years, it had come back and had spread throughout her body. So from a medical perspective, the doctors are saying, wow, look, it's obvious. This is a fast-growing, fast-spreading cancer. It wasn't here, only a couple of years ago. Now it's everywhere. So, if you project forward based on what's happened in the last 2 years, it makes sense that there's going to be, there's only a few months left. But, of course, that's assuming that everything stays the same and that it's only a purely physical thing. So the thing that, I decided to do was say, okay, so the medicine can't do anything. Let's find out. I was very engaged in NLP. Let's see if NLP can make a difference. And again, in those days, we had a very strong belief that NLP, it was before NLP became world famous, but we believed this could really make a difference. So that's when I started, just doing some basic things with my mother about, we knew that that visualization could make a difference in people's, physiology. And we were even using NLP from the very beginning. We used it to work with physical things, but nobody had ever used, specifically worked with cancer before. We were just, so this was an exploration. And what became obvious, it was right away, was in my mother's case, she had kind of really got caught in this belief system that, how would I say, that this was going to sort of play out in a certain way. And so when I was asking her, what to look at the future and see what kind of goals she might have, her first response was, well, I don't have a future, so that's already where there's a belief involved. So a first part of sleight of mouth would be something like saying, well, okay, we don't know how long you're going to live. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 6 days, maybe it's 6 years. We don't know. But how do you want to live those 6 years, right? So those 6 years or 6 weeks or 6 hours, whatever it is. So now what you're doing is you're reframing it. You're taking it out of this kind of fixed time perspective. So that's already a shift. So what would make it worth, to live and live fully, to actually live those times instead of just start preparing to die or something. So that's already a first shift. And I'm not going to go over all of that, written about these in other books, but we started saying, okay, what beliefs would you need in order to have the shift? And I would say, just the basic idea here is that when my mother first got breast cancer the first time, she just wanted her old life back as quickly as possible, right? So that's all I want. I want to get rid of this so I can have my old life back. It makes sense in a way, but she didn't change anything, right? She just had a radical mastectomy. Done. The doctors gave her old life back. When she got to the second time, it became obvious that the old life is now over, right? But now, does that mean my whole life is over? Now, the old life is over. And in fact, the old life might be something that was contributing to what was happening anyway. So now we're starting to this process of let's engineer a new life. And what values guide that life? What beliefs guide that life? And just as another example, she started to have this sense of a way that she could be, that's this life that she could have. She began to become very excited. But then there was this, and this was I think, a key part of where you see where there's this issue of beliefs and sleight of mouth. Suddenly there was this very strong, like an unconscious reaction, just kind of shutting down. That was something like, no, no, not for you. You cannot have that life. It's not for you. So we think that's interesting. Let's bring some attention there. Let's find out what that's about. And this is the way that beliefs work. And that's, in fact, it's important to know about sleight of mouth. People are not always going to just say the belief. They don't even know what the belief is, when we talk about a thought virus. So you have to bring awareness there. And in fact, before any words came, my mother had an image of her own mother and her older sister, who had both died of breast cancer, metastatic breast cancer. It was, okay, that's interesting. What these images are about. Well, then the beliefs started to come out. Okay, they were in my mother's case, they're her role models. They're the people that, this is what happens to the women in my family. Who am I to break the mold? Who am I to be different? In fact, sort of the belief was that it would in fact be almost disloyal if she got to live this life and they didn't, right? And so there's where you get this very interesting notion of, okay, loyalty is an important value, but what are your beliefs about it? And so here's where the sleight of mouth comes in, right? So she's saying, yeah, there's this belief that's a very powerful identity and beyond belief, right? It's not just a belief like, is this nice or not nice? It's, this is about, your destiny, your life, your legacy, your heritage. And so the shift was, I said, well, look, I understand that loyalty is very important, but I noticed that you're only thinking about loyalty looking backwards in the past. I think you should look at least as far into the future as you are to the past to see your daughter, my sister, and your potential grandchildren, your daughter's daughters. They're looking at you to see how they should be, the way that you're looking at your mother. Do you want them to be loyal to you by dying of metastatic breast cancer? Is that what you would want? And of course, she said, no, no, I would never want that. I would want them to live their life fully. Oh, well, guess what? What are you going to pass down? You're the role model. So now, all of a sudden, and this is the power of sleight of mouth, right? This thing that's holding you back powerfully, and maybe even, is going to create this place where you give up. Suddenly, all of that energy gets directed to making a complete life change. And that's when, my mother that was a big moment where she realized, okay, it's not just about me, and I'm not the end of this chain. I'm the beginning of another chain. And so that's when she really, began to make this commitment to have a new life. And the other interesting, and this I think is another interesting example of sleight of mouth, that when she first got this diagnosis, it was the worst thing in her life that had ever happened. It's the worst thing that ever happened. after she made this change, and then she lived another 18 years, I think it was, had a remarkable recovery to the surprise of her doctors, etc. But she would look back and say, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. You know, she said, I was lucky. I got 2 lives. Most people only get one. He said, and my second life was so much better than the first because it was my life. So now this is the key to this idea of sleight of mouth, sleight of mind, right? That a shift in perspective can change everything, right? It can change your life, literally. And that's ultimately what, sleight of mouth is about. And what it would ultimate goal would be is let's do something life-changing. So I think there's much more I could say, but I think that's kind of
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing this with us,
yeah.
Robert. I'm still curious in this area. Is there a particular sleight of mouth pattern that you have used to help your mother, and also there are so many people suffering with not only with cancer, with different disease
Yeah.
all over the world today, and how come medical doctors don't use sleight of mouth patterns with their
Oh,
patients more to help them?
yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, there's several questions in your question, but for this last one, of course, medical doctors aren't trained to use language. They're trained, they're in their view, health is mechanical, right? It's not, it's what you say doesn't matter. It's like the ghost, they say the ghost in the machine, right? That ghost can't make any difference. What you think isn't going to make any difference. And I think this is where, new research in areas of things like psychoneuroimmunology are important, that where you realize that there are, your nervous system interacts with your endocrine system and your, immune system and your autonomic nervous system. So yeah, these things are all together, and thoughts can make a difference. They do make a difference. As far as your first question, is there a particular one? Not necessarily. I don't think so. I think, I don't think that cancer itself is created by a particular sort of a single limiting belief. Um, and I don't think that, and I also don't think, by the way, that is created by only beliefs anyway. I mean, I think there's many, many, think that it's a very complex, we're complex organisms in a complex environment. So the key is that belief can, again, one of the fundamental principles of NLP in general, but also of sleight of mouth, is that energy follows attention, right? Energy flows where attention goes. Where do you need to put your energy in order to heal something? We know that from the placebo effect, that belief can have a tremendous impact on health and healing. That's actually also one of the things that got me very interested in working with beliefs, and then, of course, tangentially or parallel, then sleight of mouth, which is about the language, how language influences beliefs. But with the placebo effect, somebody can they can take a medication that actually has no drugs in it, but because they believe it's going to make a difference, it can make tremendous differences. Plus every drug has to be tested against placebos, and placebos work for pretty much anything that they treat. They even have these placebo side effects. This is one of my favorite examples. Is they gave a group of women who had breast cancer placebo chemotherapy. So there's no drug in it at all, right? They're given this treatment, and a third of the women in the study lost all of their hair. So you can actually have this. Also shows that your belief is not only it can cut both ways, right? Yes, I think it's going to help me, but it's also going to hurt me, right? My hair is going to fall out. So one of the things we know is that beliefs have a tremendous influence. They're not the only cause, but they certainly have influence. And sometimes they're a difference that makes the difference. So, and I think, I think one other thing that's happening, and if we think about cancer, by the way, Alexander, I've been in Paris. I've been working with an institute called Institute Raphael, who does what they call multidisciplinary integrative oncology. So you have people of all kinds of cancer, and what they're doing is they're using, other integrative treatments. And of course, the interesting thing there is that the mindset is a completely different mindset than traditional medicine. In traditional medicine, you treat the disease, right? So if somebody has breast cancer, you give them a particular regime of chemotherapy. Doesn't matter how old they are, doesn't matter how tall they are, it doesn't matter what their diet is. You give every single person who has the same, diagnosis, the same treatment. My wife had breast cancer about over a dozen years ago, and it does. You're the breast in room 3, right? Now the shift of mindset, and I think this is also the shift of NLP and the sleight of mouth, is you don't treat the disease. What you're treating is the patient, and each and every patient is completely unique. You can't give the same treatment. This is what I learned from Milton Erickson, right? He never did the same thing twice with any two patients because they're different. You're not the same person. And so I think one of the reasons that this is not being used as much as it could yet is that there first has to be this fundamental shift in mindset, that it's not about the disease, it's about the unique individual. And then that's where something like the sleight of mouth, and that's why I say it, I don't know that you could say there's one particular sleight of mouth pattern. It's going to depend on that person. I remember, just as an example, when I was first going down at 20 years old to study with Milton Erickson, I always had, 1,000 questions for him, so Dr. Erickson, if a patient has this, is it better to do this or say that? And he'd always give the same answer. He'd think about it for a moment, and then he'd say in his Erickson way, I don't know. Okay, he doesn't know. But what about this? Pretty much everything, I don't know. But he wasn't trying to be evasive. He would actually follow it by saying, he said, look, for that unique person, given the rapport that we have, given what has come before, he says, I really don't know. But I'm very curious to discover what is possible and what's possible now. And then now, right, 2 seconds later, something might be possible that wasn't possible 2 seconds before, because you're in this dynamic, changing, situation. And I think this is the kind of mindset that's necessary to be able to do these things effectively, because it's not about a kind of a reaction to a symptom. It's about, working with an incredible, dynamic, magical system in a way. That's where the magic is. So that's probably more than you need for your answer, but
Uh,
okay.
so, so volume 2, would you say is an upgrade? So what is the difference between sleight of mouth volume 1 and advanced sleight of mouth volume 2?
Right. So first of all, the whole idea of sleight of mouth 2 is that it's intended to be more about application, more practical. The other thing is that after 25 years of having, been working with, teaching, using sleight of mouth, I wanted to be able to, define these patterns more clearly. So one of the keys in volume 2 is we're saying that the sleight of mouth is not just a kind of a verbal recipe. It's actually, each pattern is a product of a mindset. So, you don't start with words, you actually start by shifting your way of thinking. So each pattern is a different way of thinking. It's a different way of looking at the same reality. It's a different filter. It's through language, you're going to create a new filter. Like my example with my mother, right? You're looking in the past, you want to look to the future. So, it's suddenly expanding the map of the world. And I think the thing that Bandler and Grinder said from the very beginning was, change comes naturally when your map of the world is expanded, when it's enriched. And so what I wanted to do first with, Sleight of Mouth 2 was give more examples, historical examples. So there's historical examples in each of how each pattern was used by some famous person in history, how Milton Erickson used it in his, hypnotherapeutic approach. Here's not only the pattern, but here's the mindset that goes with that pattern, and that's usually driven by a question. So by answering the question is how you're actually doing the sleight of mouth. So, or by posing the question. In the case of my mother, I didn't tell her something. I asked her a question about, loyalty is important. Is this the loyalty that you want your own daughter to have to you? Do you want that to be the same? I'm not saying something. I'm not attacking the belief. You're suddenly expanding these possibilities. Now, the other thing then that is key in volume 2 is, so I go over explicitly what are the principles behind sleight of mouth, what are the skills to use it effectively. Then you have the patterns, right? The patterns themselves are patterns that, like anything else, they can be used, misused, they can be used poorly, they can be used superficially, right? So if you want to use them well, there's certain principles you need to understand. Then there's certain skills that you need to use with them. I mean, for example, having rapport helps a lot, being able to take what we would call an NLP second position, having some kind of empathy helps a lot. And then the key is there's what I call the strategies of sleight of mouth. So the strategies would mean, okay, if you take what some of these people in history did with the language, sometimes they're using sleight of mouth to motivate somebody to do something risky. Sometimes you're using sleight of mouth to shift somebody's perception dramatically of a particular situation. Sometimes you're using sleight of mouth to just examine, you think critically about a belief. So one of the things I am doing is by taking sort of modeling some of the key figures that I actually, was studying myself that could be, sort of famous examples. I use a couple of examples from Shakespeare, which even though they're fictional, they're very clear how, the language aspect is very clear. But I'm also looking at people like Gandhi, people like, you know, Socrates, etc. And so saying, okay, this idea of a strategy then is rather than just use one sleight of mouth pattern or another one, or sort of do it by trial and error, or sometimes I say trial and horror. You want to say, okay, I might actually want to use a series, this particular series, and I'm starting here with this pattern. I might repeat that several times. Then I'm going to go to this other one as a result of that, because this is going to output something that then I can take and go to some other pattern with. So that I think is an important part of it, is that it's saying, and this all goes back to this idea that sleight of mouth is not just about verbal recipes, verbal responses. It's about using language strategically in order to be able to create a certain shift of mindset. And that means you have to know where to go. So I would say the other thing that I bring in sleight of mouth too are the patterns of genius. So I'm saying, okay, if I take these patterns, the sleight of mouth patterns, and I use them through these filters or these strategies of genius, what kind of results do you get? And that's where I think it becomes really interesting, because now you're realizing, okay, I'm using these patterns for a certain purpose in order to, create a better world, and a whole new possibility. So that I think is key. And also the other thing that is in volume 2 that's not in volume 1 are the so-called Polya patterns. George Polya was a mathematician, and he developed what he called these patterns of plausible inference, which are essentially what you would call belief strategies. They're the strategies by which people build beliefs. And again, he was a mathematician, so he realized that, okay, mathematics is a belief system itself, And, when you try to prove a theorem, you're using certain kinds of patterns of inference. But then he also realized it's exactly the same thing happens that would happen, say, in a criminal trial. You're trying to prove that somebody was guilty of something. How do you convince an audience? If nobody was there to see them, right? You don't have no eyewitness, but you're trying to prove that this person did it. What would be the kinds of things that you would have to have? So, anyway, those patterns I think are very interesting because they tell you how people build beliefs, but also then how you might go about potentially challenging them or creating, a different perspective.
So for someone who might not know NLP and is thinking, what are these patterns especially valuable for? What are their
Yeah,
main purpose? How can an average person in an everyday situation use sleight of mouth patterns in business or in sales? How can
sure.
they be used there?
Sure. I think the first thing to realize is that sleight of mouth patterns are especially important whenever it comes to beliefs. So I think we live most of our lives, you know, with beliefs. If somebody's going to buy something, they have to believe that it's valuable. If you're in business and you want to grow your business, you have to believe that it's possible. Basically, you have to believe that something is desirable. You have to believe it's possible. You have to believe it's appropriate. You have to believe you're capable to do it. You have to believe that you deserve it. I mean, beliefs are basically how would I say, they are the foundation of our lives, And so, sleight of mouth, first of all, as I said, it's a little bit like one application of it is it's a little bit like computer virus software, malware detection. So at least you go, hey, if somebody's saying something to me, whether it's political, whether it's health related, like my mother's case, etc., what can I recognize when something is potentially not going to be helpful to me and filter that out. Number two, okay, let's say I want to, you know, have some way of being able to influence my own beliefs or beliefs of somebody else. This is the whole idea of conversational belief change. And knowing these patterns is how you would be able to, first of all, you'll be much more persuasive. I mean, it's the patterns of persuasion. Persuasive about anything you want to be persuasive about. Secondly, you are also much more protected against sort of being, what I say, take either, what's the right word, taken advantage of, or, or you influenced in a negative way by somebody else. So I think these patterns are, you hear them every day in every conversation because people are going to express a belief about something, and it's good to know, well, what are the beliefs that this is actually, based upon? And if somebody says, well, this is not a belief system, they're lying because it can't not be. Everything is based on a belief system. And I think this is an important part of sleight of mouth. It doesn't necessarily say that this belief is real or true. We say in NLP, the map is never the territory. The map is not the territory. But the question is, where is that map going to lead me? And is that where I want to go? So it helps you to be much, much, much more clear about, everything that in your life. It helps you to make better choices. It helps you to be, again, more influential. So I think those would be my main answers.
Some people may say that sleight of mouth it's a manipulation. So, what is your response to that? How can we ensure that sleight of mouth patterns are being used in a
Yeah,
productive,
yeah,
ecological, ethical, helpful manner?
yeah. That's the whole idea of why you have the principles and the skills, and why we also use the strategies of genius, right? Because first of all, I think you have to realize all language is manipulation. As soon as you speak, you're manipulating somebody. You're trying to, get them to understand something. You're trying to, get them to listen to you or whatever. So all language is presumably manipulative. I think what people normally mean by manipulative is that it's win-lose. I'm winning and you're losing. So I'm using language to try to put somebody else down. I'm using language to try to, gain something for myself. I win and somebody else loses. So I think this is the whole notion of what I think you said, you want to be ecologically manipulative. I mean, if I take a pencil and I write with it, I'm manipulating the pencil. I mean, I'm making it do something. So that's not so much the issue to me. Again, the issue is in which way are you using that? The doctors that gave the diagnosis to my mother, they weren't trying to they weren't trying to manipulate her, but they were expressing a belief that they believed in, and they thought that she should believe it too. So we do that all the time. So now the whole question then is, well, so how do I want to use my language? First of all, the people don't realize that language, it's like the doctors, your language makes a difference. As soon as you realize that, now how do I want to use it? What kind of difference do I want to make? And that's where things like the strategies of genius come in. So the strategies of genius patterns of genius are things like, look to the future, look to a better future. You want to see things systemically. You want to, one of the things that I do put in, and I think this is very relevant to your question, Alexander, is there's a whole, in volume 2, there's a series of what I call red flags. Red flags are warning signs. And these warning signs are, that doesn't mean that something's bad or wrong, but it's a warning. It says, watch out, be careful. For example, if there's what we in NLP we call the problem frame versus outcome frame. So if all the language is directed towards this is a problem, why it's a problem, whose fault it is, what's going to go wrong because of it, that's going to start taking you down, you might say in English, a particular rabbit hole, right? You start going into a certain spiral. All your attention and all the energy is going there. So we would say, okay, wait, that's problem frame. Let's switch it to an outcome frame. So what do you want instead? Where do you want to go? How will we get there? So now, again, sometimes you have to name the problem. There's nothing wrong about that. But if that's all where all the energy is going, that's a red flag. Another one would be this idea that you're only going away from something and not towards something. Another red flag would be if something seems to presume negative intention on somebody else's part. I mean, all conspiracy theories presume negative intentions on others, on the part of anonymous others, them. They're trying to do this to you. And as soon as you hear that from me, I go, wait, that's a red flag, So you want to go, okay, let's first chunk down instead of these anonymous others, the government or whatever, the billionaires, whatever. It's like, wait a minute, let's start trying to chunk that down. Another red flag would be something like a negative identity judgment, that these people are, they're evil, they're bad, they are, again, whatever judgment you want to make. So that's one of the things that we're doing is, and that is not so much, I mean, if you get the point that that's not so much about sleight of mouth itself, it's about the mindset that is driving those words. You could say it's kind of like, having a scissors, right? I can cut paper with it. I can stab somebody with it. Does that mean the scissors is bad? The scissors is just, it's a tool. And if it can't cut, it's not going to, be very, very effective. So yeah, sleight of mouth cannot cut. I mean, if it can't impact, it's not very effective. So this is where that whole notion that's especially put into volume 2, what are the principles? What are the skills to use it ecologically and effectively? And then what are the strategies?
So besides limiting beliefs, and we talk about quite a lot about them, where else or what else are sleight of mouth patterns useful for?
Well, they're all about beliefs. So instead of limiting beliefs, of course, they're about empowering beliefs, and they're about what kind of beliefs are going to make a good life, a healthy life, a successful life, a wealthy life. I mean, what beliefs are there necessary? In fact, this is one of the things that I do. There's even it's done towards the end of the Sleight of Mouth Volume 2, but we even do sort of another advanced program where I'll say, what if you picked 3 beliefs that if you had them and you really believed them would totally change your life? And why don't you believe them? Or pick 3, in NLP, we often talk about 7 plus or minus 2, right? 7 plus or minus 2 beliefs that if people in the world had them, you would have a completely different world, a healthier world, a more, a more cooperative world. What would be those beliefs? And then what stops people from having them? And I think, that's key then is, again, Sleight of Mouth is going to give you the know-how to be able to design your life better, right? For most people, they don't even, one of the interesting things is most people don't even know that it's a belief. I'll have somebody who says, "Oh, I can't do this because," and I go, "Wow, that's a limiting belief." And they go, "Well, that's not a belief. That is how it is," right? So most people don't even realize they're living in this ocean of belief because they're unconscious to it. So I think one of the keys and one of the important things about Sleight of Mouth is bringing awareness to the fact that we live in an ocean of beliefs. Which beliefs are serving us? They may have served us in the past, but they're no longer, helpful. And it's not because it's a good belief or a bad belief. It's just it no longer fits for who we are. So I think it's not, you're right that it's not just about limiting beliefs. In fact, the whole idea is, what is the belief that I want to be able to have? And then is there something getting in the way of that? So,
Yeah, you are also famous for the levels of change pyramid.
right.
And
Yes.
how are these levels related to the sleight of mouth and NLP?
Well, of course, so those levels you have the environmental level, which is sort of this level of physical reality. But, so how do I change my physical reality? I do it through my behavior. If I want to, I pick up my scissors and I change something, right? So this is in the environment. My behavior does it. But how do I know, how do I know what I want to cut and which way to cut it? That's not based on my behavior is guided by some inner mental map, right? It's a mental model. So we say there's the where and the when, there's the what to do, there's how to do it. And then, of course, we've been saying all along that sleight of mouth is about belief, which is why. Why are you doing it that way? You know, why is this important? Um, and then you have above that, of course, this level of identity. If I say I believe something, who's believing it? The I is different. The I that believes it is not the belief; it's something else, right? That's choosing it. So you actually are going beyond the belief. And then there's an I, but this I is also part of something bigger than me. It's not, I don't end here, right? I'm part of a family, I'm part of a community, I'm part of a profession. And so the levels, of course, and this is, I think, one of the things that is we'll be even looking at in the program, is that different ways of speaking bring attention to different levels, right? So I can talk about the environment, and what I do, I'm going to use certain kinds of words, descriptive words. But those same words are not going to be the same as if I'm talking about how I think about some things. That's a different type of language, and similarly with belief. So our language, as we said, directs attention to different aspects of this pyramid and connects different aspects of the pyramid, right? So I can have a belief about the environment. I can say this environment is dangerous, right? I can believe, right, this is a dangerous thing. If I believe that, it becomes dangerous, Um, I can believe in, that it's wrong to do something. I can believe it's wrong to think something. So belief can, I can connect different, levels, and I can have beliefs about each of these levels. So I think this is very key. A lot of times, one of the things that you're doing with sleight of mouth, in fact, and when we talk about reframing, I might reframe something from being a judgment about identity. So somebody says, I'm so stupid. You might say, oh, what I hear you saying is that you haven't yet learned how to, do this properly. Well, now you've reframed it, and you've taken something from an identity statement down to a capability statement. And so this is one of the other things you're doing with sleight of mouth, is the type of words that you're choosing and the way that you use them is going to bring attention to, different parts of that pyramid. And again, that's one of the things that can make a huge difference.
Robert, I have maybe 6, 7 questions. We can
Yeah.
skip some of them. You tell me just the time frame. I want to be respectful for your time.
No, thank you, Alexander. We can keep going.
Okay. I'll try to. I skipped a few already, and
yeah, I know. I mean, it's not. I mean, I'm giving long answers, so
I know. No, it's perfect. It's perfect. I'm enjoying a lot. So,
okay.
and
All right.
it's beautiful. Last time I
Okay.
had tears in my eyes when I finished the interview. It was so emotional. Like, and we didn't even do the interview really. Yeah. So, what does it mean when you say how words change worlds?
Yeah. So I think this is a great question, because it's like we were saying, even if you take the answers to these questions that we've had so far, what we're saying is that, the words themselves are a way of creating, first of all, they're going to shift attention, they're going to shift mindset. How do we create a world, right? How first you have to believe that something is possible in order to create something. Before you can build a flying machine, you have to believe that it's possible to build a flying machine, or that you can fly. So the words themselves are going to determine, again, where energy goes. And if you take this pyramid, if I don't believe that something is important, even if I have the capability to do it, I'm not going to use that capability. If I suddenly believe that that is important, then those capabilities will become naturally engaged. So again, words change worlds, because words are going to either expand or restrict our map of the world and our map of what's possible. And by doing so, that's the world that we are going to create. The map is not the territory, but we only have the map to work from. And so if I only have half a map, that's all the territory I'm going to be able to work with. So words have this, again, it's this magical capability. In the introduction to Volume 1, I go over this, I use this quote from Sigmund Freud, who said, words can, they can create, they can bring people to war, they can bring people to peace, you can make somebody happy and laugh, you can make them cry based on the words that you use, the way that you speak, and so words have this, for human beings, they have this pretty interesting magical quality that no other animal or mammal has. That we're making these noises right now, and like you said, it could bring tears to your eyes. It can make somebody feel ready to act. It's pretty interesting. So human beings, and one of the things that Bandler and Grinder said that also really struck me, they said, language isn't just words. There's a whole part of the brain that it's the same. You have a part of the brain developed for vision, for motor skills, for everything. It's a part of the whole brain. It has it's a representational system in and of itself. So that again, maybe the simplest way to say it is that because words are one of the key ways that we build our maps of the world, that when you change the map, you change what's possible in the world, right? If it's not in the map, it doesn't exist. As soon as it's in the map, it has that potential to exist. So I think that's probably the best way I could express that.
That's wonderful. So, effective and ecological use of sleight of mouth seems to be a challenging skill. How to get started and achieve skillfulness as
Yeah.
quickly as possible?
Well, I think this is one of the things that we go over in the book, as I said. So there's what are those skills? What is the skill that you need? And one of the first ones is that um, you know, so one of the things that we say that actually relates in a way to this pyramid. You have the levels that go up, and then we have two sides, and we say one side is what we call the ego, and the other is the soul. And we live in a world where, on the one hand, we are a unique, independently thinking individual, right? There's only one me in all this world, and my self-care is important. I need to watch out for me. I need to feel a sense of control, right? And so that's the ego side. By ego, I don't necessarily mean Freud, but I just mean I am a unique individual, and I've got to take care of me. On the other side, the soul side, I don't mean religion, but I mean, okay, I am part of something bigger than me. I am part of a community. I'm part of a family. I'm part of a global ecology. And, I contribute to that. So, on one side is control, on the other side is contribution. Now, what often happens is that these two things come into conflict, right? If I do something for me, remember this idea I was saying of win-lose, right? So what is when something is unecological, it's when one part of an ecosystem is benefiting at the expense of other parts of that ecosystem. Now, whether that's me, I'm an ecosystem as an individual, and parts of me can be in conflict. I can be in conflict with others. And again, the fascinating thing about consciousness, human consciousness, is that it can shrink, and all I can be aware of is my own safety, and that's it. That's all I care about. Versus I can expand that awareness, and I can realize that I am part of something much bigger. And so I think um, this notion of ecology means I want to be able to be in a mindset that is going to take into consideration as much of my ecosystem as possible and try to, uh, create actions that will positively influence that. One of my favorite quotes from Steve Jobs, he said, when you grow up, you tend to be told that, the world is the way that it is, and your life is to live inside of that world. So to make some money, have some fun, have a good family life, but don't bash the walls too much, right? Don't make too much disturbance. And he said, yeah, but that's a pretty limited life. He said, life can be much broader once you understand this one simple fact. And he said, and that is that, you are part of that world, right? That you can make a difference. You can change it. He says that it gives this example. You can poke something here and it comes out the other side. So you're forming that world. It's not that it's there independent of you. You're a part of it. And he said, once you realize that, you're going to want to make it better, because you're, and I think this is so profound because most people feel I don't make a difference. My thoughts don't matter. My actions don't matter. Um, and yet you realize, I mean, I become who I am. I started off as a 19-year-old nobody. Why did I become who I am? It's because I think I can make a difference, right? And I look for the things that do make a difference, right? What are the differences that make a difference? And then you realize, hey, you can change the world. You know, you can, by things that you say, by things that you make. And that's one thing Steve Jobs said. So you can make things that are going to make a difference in that world. So I think this is an interesting principle of ecology. The first thing that I think what most people don't have is they don't actually think that what I do is going to make any difference. If I throw my trash out the window, who cares? But you start to realize, well, wait, the way that I'm speaking actually is going to make a difference. The words that I'm using right now, or that I've written in a book, somebody might be reading 100 years from now, and it makes a difference in their life. What I mean? Then you start to have an actual, how do I say, a pragmatic sense of ecology, which is not just it should be ethical. It's no, you will be naturally ecological when you realize I make a difference. So I think one of the examples in volume 2 is Oprah Winfrey. And Oprah Winfrey's, so a media mogul, but Oprah Winfrey started, she was born to an unwed mother in poverty, in African American. This is the least person that you would expect is going to grow up to be the first, not only the first woman billionaire, but the first African American woman billionaire. How does she get from there, that start, to there? And she says, it's mindset. Right? It's that, you start to realize, hey, it's not just the world and I have to live in this world. She was told all kinds of limiting things. But if you start to shift those beliefs and you go, wait a minute, I can make a difference, then I think, as I said, I think that the ecology begins to become naturally, because you realize what I do is going to affect other things. And what kind of world do I want to live in? What kind of world am I going to want to create? So again, that's a long answer to a good question.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect. So who is this for? Who should learn and use sleight of mouth?
Well, I would start by saying what Bandler and Grinder used to answer when they said, who is NLP for? And the term they used is, they said it's for professional communicators. And professional first, not only, but first. And professional communicators are anybody who makes the majority of their living by communicating, right? By words, by how you speak, and by, which could be obviously anybody from a counselor or a coach to a manager to a doctor to a lawyer, or anybody where my communication is going to make a difference. Now, I think beyond that, as we said, especially because sleight of mouth is around beliefs, it's anybody where belief is going to make a difference in your ability to be successful. That either your own beliefs, starting with them, but also are people's beliefs part of this. I've been thinking. I had a colleague who was coaching a women's beach volleyball team for the Olympics, and so a coach is going to make their how do I say, their success is based on their ability to communicate, and in particular belief. If your team doesn't believe in themselves, they're not going to perform. If they do, you're going to make a difference. It was funny. We were at the Olympics watching the archers, right? So you have these women archers, and they have a coach. It's interesting, what do the coaches say to the people, and whether you get it's going to make a difference maybe between whether you get the bullseye or not. So again, any place where words and belief is going to be a difference that makes a difference, that's who it's for. That's who can benefit.
Is there any particular application that you have for relationships, career, sales? You talked a little bit about social media, maybe in everyday communication. How can we use sleight of mouth every single day?
Well, it's like I would say, first of all, because every single day you're going to be choosing and living certain beliefs, and you're going to be potentially meeting opposing beliefs, either in yourself or from others. So the first thing is, one application is, what are the things that you say to yourself? What kinds of, affirmations do you have? If you think about common uses of language, are things like, prayer, like singing, where you're using words to again, what is prayer about? You're using words to try to create a world, to try to create a future. So, there'd be certain, let's call them practices that, what beliefs am I going to practice today? What things am there've been times in my own life where I've written down certain statements and I put them on my walls all over the house, because that's the thing that I need to be guiding me in that day. So I think, again, the uses of sleight of mouth are first for ourselves personally. What kind of belief, what are the, again, like I said, what are the 7 plus or minus 2 beliefs that I want to be guiding me today, or guiding, maybe not just today even, but for the next period?
Robert, let's do a short example.
Obstacles that I might meet.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
let's say I have a belief, I've tried everything, but I just can't lose weight, or I'm not good at public speaking, or,
Yeah.
let's do an example.
Yeah. Sure. Let's start with first one. I've tried everything. So first thing you go, oh, I've tried everything, so I can't lose weight. That's a classic belief. So what would sleight of mouth do? Sleight of mouth would be, you don't want to attack that. You don't want to say, you're wrong. Don't tell me that. That would not be, first of all, it's not sleight of mouth. So sleight of mouth would be, we might first look at the intention of that, right? So one of the sleight of mouth patterns is intention. I'm not going to respond to the limiting belief. I'm going to look at the intention. What is the positive intention of that belief? And again, it might come out as a question. That's a question there. I might also kind of experiment. Well, maybe that positive intention is so that I'm not frustrated. I'm trying to avoid frustration. Well, that's interesting. That's avoiding something. There's one of those. So first of all, there's a lot of red flags in that belief, right? It's a problem frame, obviously. So there's no outcome frame in it. And I think maybe this is an important thing to think about. Before I even start choosing any particular sleight of mouth pattern, I want to kind of get a sense of these red flags. So that particular belief, problem frame, it's not directly away from, but probably the intention is I want to avoid feeling frustrated. I want to avoid failing again. So we go, okay, there's another thing that we possibly want to shift. It's one of the, it's not so much a negative identity judgment, but it's kind of going in that direction. I usually often like to, in any event, I often like to start with intention, because intention is, it's important to first to realize that this limiting belief, why is it limiting? First of all, it's partially because it's actually serving the person in some way, right? I wouldn't have it if it wasn't doing something for me, even though, so part of me, and this is where you get this interesting thing. So part of me feels I'm stuck with that. Another part is, well, this is true. So why would I want to have this belief? Why would I? In fact, you probably, if I did try to tell the person, well, no, you probably haven't tried everything. Yes, I have. They're going to defend it pretty strongly, right? So why? Because it's serving some positive purpose. If I do not know that purpose, then I'm much more likely to, to be manipulative, right? In the sense that I'm going to try to get them to change something that's not in their best interest. It's not going to actually serve them ecologically. So I need to first kind of get that sense, not of the belief itself. And this is the whole idea of sleight of mouth. It's not about the belief. It's about some other perspective about that belief. And, so there's intention is one. Another one could be something like, we call it metaframe. So metaframe is, why does somebody have that belief? It's a belief about the belief. So first of all, I would even by having the person realize, well, yeah, that is an interesting belief to have about, losing weight. So now already what you've done, you've said it's not reality, it's a belief, So there's already a shift. You might go to, consequences. So if you take either of these beliefs that you were mentioning, they're creating a kind of what we call a crash state, contraction, reactivity, some kind of analysis paralysis, some kind of separation. So the first thing I want to do is I don't want to put my attention on this belief itself and try to change the belief. That's actually not what sleight of mouth is about. It's about opening a perspective. in the example I gave with my mother, I never tried to tell her it's wrong to be loyal to your family. That's, that would have been attacking her belief. I want to shift that belief. That's the magic of it. It's this idea of pacing and leading. So somebody like Milton Erickson might say, you're right, you've tried everything, but your unconscious has not. Now, then the person might go, what? So yeah, your cognitive mind, you've tried everything that is in your cognitive map. So sure, of course you're right. But now but just by saying that, you've opened up these other possibilities, right? So the thing about sleight of mouth, and you notice how you sort of, it created this kind of a laugh, right? Because it's like, oh, wait, suddenly there's some other possibility. I've created this belief is true given this map, and this map, and as soon as I can do something that enriches that map, there's now a whole other world out there. And again, so the reality in terms of how I would be interacting with that person would not simply be, I'd hear the words of their belief and then try to say which sleight of mouth pattern I would use. I would want to say, what's my rapport with this person? What do I know about what they want? And then that's going to tell me which of these patterns could be the most effective.
Perfect. I think you already answered, but how can we use sleight of mouth to bridge this gap and turn limiting beliefs into action plans for achieving our goals?
Yeah. So again, that's where this notion of principles and skills come in. That's where the strategy comes in. Because sleight of mouth itself, it's like saying, how do I use the scissors to create a better world? Well, okay, the scissors is a tool. So I first have to, this is where the strategies of genius come in. I first have to be able to, I'm not going to just start immediately reacting using sleight of mouth. I need to envision, well, what is that world I want to create? Then once I know, and this is, in the program, we'll talk about things like belief chaining, right? Once I know where I want to go, and here's the belief I'm starting with, what's the chain that's going to be able to lead me there? So it's something that's more about not so much the words themselves, but what is it that we want to try to create through the words? And that's what's going to help to lead us. And it's one of the things I tell people, because people that say, well, I'm not very good at language. It's not about the language. If you have the mindset, the words will come naturally. So it doesn't matter if you're good at English or, the sleight of mouth is not language specific. If I have the mindset, whatever words are necessary will come. So.
Can you share some examples of how sleight of mouth has been successfully applied in helping people or businesses? We heard the case
Sure.
of your mom or your mother. Do you have any other case studies or students or clients that achieved success with using sleight of mouth?
Many, I mean, many, as I said, if you think about somebody like Steve Jobs, that quote I was giving, is basically a belief system. He's saying, you're told that the world is the way it is, and your life is to live in that world. So for me, if you're going to build any business, you're going to build it on belief, because nothing starts successful, right? You have to build it. And you got to start by believing that that's going to make a difference. And so one of my books is called Conscious Leadership and Resilience. It's one of the success factor modeling books. And we give a number of examples there about how leaders use sleight of mouth, because a leader, you have a vision, and you're trying to inspire other people to share that vision and then to act towards that vision. If you can't, I mean, again, this is one of the classic uses of something like sleight of mouth. As a leader, I have to get people to believe in that vision and then to be inspired to take action in order to create it. So, this is where you have to have that belief that it's important, that it's worth it, that it's possible, that we can do it, we deserve it. And so, there's I think in the book there's some interesting examples. There's a woman who I knew was she was a person that worked at Disney, and she was a CEO of several of the Disney companies. She actually was a part of the group that started the Disney Store, which was the first, Disney Store was sort of the first one of these stores that was just for a particular, not for a particular product, but for, like the Apple Store. Now there's many of these stores. But she also took over at a certain moment Disney Interactive, which was their video game um, uh, division, and it was not succeeding. And of course, at Disney, the belief is that everything Disney touches should be successful, but this video game wasn't. And a lot of it had to do with beliefs about video games. That people, the people that buy video games are often, teenage boys, and teenage boy doesn't want to, swim around the Little Mermaid or something. They want to shoot the Little Mermaid and all this. So she had to, sort of get the sense and reframe this whole approach. What would be the vision of this division of Disney? What beliefs would people need to have in order for this to succeed? What beliefs were getting in the way? And in fact, she realized there was a particular product, a game, that she thought could really make a difference. And the big challenge was, normally video games take 6 months to make, and most of the time where you make the most profit is at Christmas. Well, this was only 3 months till Christmas, so the belief was we can't make it. You can't do in 3 months. It's going to take 6 months. So one of the things that she had to do was to find out, okay, let's change that belief. And it was actually very interesting the way that she did it, because they said, okay, well, if you start from scratch, from nothing, it takes 6 months, but we don't have to start from nothing. Maybe we can go and acquire some other technology. Okay, now let's see. That's 6 months. That's working normal hours. We could turn 6 months to 3 months if you work, 24 hours a day, which means that you can't have, not all the same people are going to be there 24 hours, but you can do these different shifts. And so again, it starts with this mindset, and this is where I think the strategies of genius as well come in, is, all right, we can make this happen. The changes and the influence on people is going to happen through language, but you've got to be able to envision it first. So I think I'll give you one other example. As a guy, for a number of years, I ran what's called a mastermind group in Silicon Valley. A mastermind group is where you get people together, and they are essentially, you're trying to use collective intelligence, and everybody's sort of supporting each other to go to the next level in their life, their career, their project. And mine was, I had a number of interesting people, that usually in this kind of case, a mastermind group, it's kind of like Tony Robbins' Platinum Partnership. But I had like a guy who was co-founder of Siri, a guy who was co-founder of Google X, so the innovation part of Google, where they make the Google glasses, the self-driving car. They're the ones that started that. Had a famous author, a guy named named John Gray, but he wrote a book called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It's sold 50 million copies. Now, all of these people were in this program. They were already successful, but they want to go to another level. Like John Gray didn't want to sell more copies of Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. You want to go somewhere else. So anyway, it was very interesting. One of the guys in this group was a guy that developed the search engine Bing for Microsoft, that is now, it kind of has evolved a lot into ChatGPT. And in fact, he got that started. But when he first had this idea, and this is my example, one of the things he first did is, because he was just a guy, he's just a guy with, a guy with an idea, a guy with a vision. And he thought, well, of course, Google, why wouldn't Google or anybody else have already done this? And so what he did is he took a piece of paper and he wrote down all of the reasons that it wouldn't work, all the reasons that he couldn't do it, all of the reasons that probably, as one person wouldn't happen. And then he went on the other side of the paper and started intuitively doing sleight of mouth. And he actually knew he knew some sleight of mouth and he knew some strategies of genius, but went down the other side and just began to go to all the, how to reframe all of those things. And when he got through and he could reframe all of them, then he went for it. And he created a whatever $100 and something million business that, has gone on to do other things. So again, what, you got to think in terms of any business, what beliefs are necessary for that business to be successful? What's going to get in the way of those beliefs? What are the current beliefs? And then sleight of mouth is how you create the belief bridge that gets you around those obstacles. So
Perfect. I'm thrilled to share you with our audience. You're coming to Slovenia in September this year. Can you give us can you give us, Robert, a sneak peek into the sleight of mouth masterclass you're going to be teaching?
Yeah,
What will
I think
participants learn?
masterclass is a good name for it, because what we're going to do is kind of, and in that period, I think what we want to do is to first say that we want to get some of these skills and some of these principles together. We'll build some of those as foundations. Then we're going to go over what some of the strategies. So, okay, we're not going to necessarily try to, in one day, you can't master all 14 patterns. So what we're going to do is to sort of look at, I'll be having people take some beliefs. We'll do some self-practice on using certain patterns. Then we'll put them in combination and we'll do a kind of a coaching practice. So we'll be doing some self-practice, some coaching practice. I'll do some demos of how you might use it to do, for example, something like we would call a belief chain to reach a goal. So we'll show our emphasis won't just be on the patterns, it will be on how we can use those to achieve goals that are important in our lives and overcome the obstacles. I mean, so it's getting to the goal and overcoming the obstacle.
So what do you think people will go home with? When they go home, what will they have?
I think they're going to have, I mean, for me, it's kind of like what I was saying of what got me started in NLP to begin with. When I first heard about this meta model, it's like something I can use, right? So it's something that I know is going to make a difference. So I want people to, again, walk away with a tool that's going to be able to make a difference in their lives. And then, of course, they can also use to support other people. So some sense of both inspiration, but also practical, practical things that they can do.
Robert, how excited are you to come to Slovenia?
Oh, I'm super excited. It's going to be my first time. I've been in a lot of places in the world. This will be my first time to be in Slovenia. And just judging by the kind of conversations that we've had, I'm sure it's going to be very inspirational, very exciting. And yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Before we end, I'm grateful for your time. How can people follow you? How can people find you?
Well, the simplest ways, I have a website. I think you can get there by just going to robertdilts.com, but it kind of goes to the same place as nlpu.com for NLP University, nlpu.com. There's also diltstrategygroup.com. These are some of the websites, and that's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Robert, thank you. Thank you so much. Andrea, I think I asked so many questions. What do you think?
That's good. No,
You
hopefully it's
did,
not too.
you did. But it was really, really excited to listen to you. So thank you very much, Robert.
You're very welcome, Andrea. Very welcome.
So,
So I look forward to seeing you also in
Thank you.
September,
Thank you.
live and in person.
yeah, yes. Yeah, I think it will be a great experience. I really, it will be a touching thing to share you with our audience. And, many people will never afford to travel to America or to other places. And you come to Slovenia, and I appreciate it very
Yeah,
much. So thank you,
yeah.
Robert.
You're very welcome. All right, Alexander.
Take care.
All right. Have a good night. Thanks for being up so late. I know it's late. Thanks.
Yeah,
So,
but yeah,
all
we
right.
appreciate it. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Okay.